The year was 2010, and as most kids my age at the time were worried about the end of elementary and the start of middle school, there was one thing that was catching everyone, at least I knew's, eyes. As Beyblade Metal Fusion was here, and kids were watching, and at lunchtime, people were blading. Essentially, people would use the lunch containers, if you guys don't know, and they would use them. So for all those in the US, you probably know what I mean, and maybe around the world too, but that was the stadium. But getting back to the more important part, effectively, Pegasus and Leon were tearing the lunch containers apart, and I had yet to get in on it. When I finally saved up enough money through working with my dad, I actually had my dad take me over to Walmart. I would have went to a Target. The Walmart was closer to me. I scanned the toy aisle, and through there, sitting on the shelf, there were 2 bays left. Believe it or not, up until this point, I should admit this, and I'm going to, I actually hadn't watched the show, so I had only ever watched original Beyblade, but in this case, I had never watched Metal Fusion. So, before me was an evil businessman, and a guy who looked like he hadn't taken a shower in weeks. So, as you can tell, it's pretty obvious which one I left with. With my dark wolf at my side, I was ready to take on my school and show people that I was the true #1 blader. And with my dark wolf, I ended up having my legendary 0-10 defeated streak. Thanks, Doji. So if you stomached all of that, you're probably wondering, since this is a video about Chris, the character that I'm going to talk about, why start here? Well, just like so much of the Beyblade series, there's always something mysterious to be found. And when we arrived to Metal Fury, which is the 3rd season of the Metal series, they attempted to subvert the expectations of the fans. As after the big 3, and Jinga, Kyoya, and Ryuga became legendary bladers, the next chosen legendary bladers were technically at random. And when it finally came down to finding the final blader of the 4 seasons, it was put on the shoulders of the legendary #1 blader himself, Masamune, to awaken, with this culminating with the Baster Island tournament. As he finally reached the final stage, it was set, as he would vanquish this unknown threat at the start of the episode. But when Chris showed his Orion, the air filled with controversy. And in the heat of battle, Chris surged with power. And in the blink of an eye, it was over. Chris had become the final legendary blader. But what made that controversial? Besides Chris quite literally coming out of left field and a less than friendly attitude, it was clear that Masamune was in a stomp match, as this was to show off this guy's broken power, and couple that with Chris's attitude after his victory and trash talking Masamune afterwards, it put a poor taste in many people's mouth. But don't worry, Chris fans, or people who actually just like the story, it's time for me to run defend for Chris, because I actually really do like his story. As Chris's backstory starts very interestingly in this selection tournament for the World Championships, where Chris was very much like our main cast as in the time of the series, fighting for the fun and enjoyment of others, but unlike his teammates, he won all of their qualification matches, but his team did not. And as he put in the show, you can't go to the World Championship if your team doesn't win. Although being upset that they didn't make it through, Chris was not demoralized with the fact that his teammates didn't lose. But he could not see that they were demoralized. As being unable to meet his strength and the standards, his friends thought the best thing they could do was to leave him behind. As abandoned by his friends, and with more people scared of his strength, he became the blader for hire, who cared about nothing but his overwhelming strength and wanting to be alone. As by being alone, Chris could not be hurt again. Jinga Hagane, the main character of the Metal series, is the perfect protagonist. By Metal Fury, he was strong, compassionate, and serious about what he had to do. He ended up being the only one that could aid and save Chris from who he was. During their battle, Jinga would call out to Chris, as he could feel his strength, but not his passion, saying that it was just like his Orion, it refused to move, being Chris. As Chris would eventually give his backstory, Jinga listened patiently, as Jinga could see the similarities among his many rivals. But Chris's lonely path was not a path chosen by his heart, but was one chosen in his desperate attempt to avoid the pain. And when confronted by the feelings and memories of Jinga's battles and experiences, Chris buckled, as he felt something, not wanting to risk losing who he had become. Jinga would show Chris that he never quit blading, because deep down, he loved it more than anything else. As the star fragment choosing Chris was not to light the space of hope that had been empty by his abandonment of his friends. It was indicated that Chris was to represent all the other bladers who had been unknown and abandoned, in order to make a brighter future, one where they don't have to end up feeling the way he did. And just as Orion had a new light, Chris would follow suit with his spirit, changing, as it almost felt like a 180, whether you chalk that up to the writing of the show or the fact that he was actually always there, just not wanting to admit it. When it came for them to stand up to Nemesis, he aided in forming Zeus's barrier without a second thought, as he realized that just like them, blading meant everything to him, and he would try again, seeing that there was finally a path forward, and he would aid in the future. As by joining forces to stop Nemesis and confronting his path, Chris faced his past, present, and a future if they lost with the overwhelming power of Nemesis, thus completing his arc in the show. As I do believe that when it comes to the Beyblade series, at least the Metal series, because it's seeing the most attraction right now, there's a lot you can nitpick about, and focus on. The characters are usually a key aspect, as when you're pushing a product based around a toy, things have to come and go, and sometimes things have to be shown in order to narratively move the story forward, but negatively impact the main focus of other characters. But I do believe Chris is a misunderstood character, in the sense that every time people talk about him, it's usually not in a sense of positive light, and I don't really think that people should necessarily be that negative. The point I'm trying to get across is, when I really look at the arc compelled down to his story and really how much time they had to tell it, I think is what leads against liking his character, is it just feels like it's too much too fast. But what makes him so interesting is that I do believe that with a little bit more tie-in to the sequel series we would get in 0G, you start to see that Chris is to represent, just like how the World Championships was designed to represent that there was powerful bladers all over the planet. He's to represent that there are still bladers that are hiding, or basically not even just hiding, they are unknown by the main standard of the show, and they will keep coming out of the woodwork, because just like Chris, maybe these people have suffered the same type of feelings and stress, and the reason that they are not open and wanting to enjoy Beyblade for their world is that they deal with their own emotions. So, if you think I'm digging a little bit too deep into this, and if you still don't like Chris, that's completely fine. Like I said, a lot of the Beyblade stuff is a bit diversive, but I finally wanted to do a video on it, and I'm so glad I did. I actually have more coming, and before I get off, I just want to also put out there, if you want to see more content from me on Beyblade, to let me know down in the comments. I was actually thinking of writing a possible story, or a couple story arc for Chris, to make him feel more fleshed into the universe. So if you do want to see that, let me know. Also, for those wondering, if you have stayed on long enough, comparing Chris in the manga versus Chris in the anime are two, in my opinion, completely different characters. And for those who say they are not, I would like to let you know, definitely read the manga, but also watch the anime, and all of it for both sides. The manga is completely insane, in my opinion, in terms of like how different it is. It's very radically different, whereas the anime is definitely more streamlined for what they wanted to do with their messaging, but the manga is definitely more focused on Jinga. So that's kind of the key thing I want to put. By the time we get to about Metal Masters, I think even the story shifts from being more about Jinga and more about everybody. But Jinga's obviously the main character. But if you watch the manga, you know for a fact it's basically about Jinga for the most part. And I don't mind that. I'm just saying Chris's depiction in there is in my opinion, way different. Like, way different. More of a typical American thing, but like, he is way different. So I'm just putting it out there. That's all I've got for you guys today. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This is one of the first videos among our week celebration. So I did want you guys to have something a little bit different from my normal content, and I did hope you guys enjoyed. So as always, this has been Brad from the Ed Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.